for the next 3 days, 3 afternoons. Super excited to have our roster of speakers and experts joining us today. We're going to be focusing on building a better customer experience. This is kind of the theme of the day, and very much looking forward to our friends Peter and Brian from Salesforce kicking things off here. And I don't have anything else, but if you guys do, please go for it. And like I said, I'm expecting a few others to join. Yep. I know there are some competing meetings that went right up against this time, so we'll likely see others join just in a few moments here.
No, sounds good. So let me quickly introduce Brian, Peter, and maybe Brian at the same time. You can pop your presentation up, and then we can go from there. So we have two speakers. Our first speaker is Brian Solis, who's a global innovation evangelist at Salesforce, 8 times best-selling author, keynote speaker, digital anthropologist, and futurist. Yeah, Forbes has called him one of the more creative and brilliant business minds of our time, and SDNet has said that Brian is one of the 21st century business world leading thinkers. Peter is Vice President of Strategic Research at Salesforce. He has been with the company for 14 years, since joining as its first head of platform research in 2007. He currently works with Salesforce customers, partners, and account teams to accelerate digital transformation and respond to new challenges of information scale and governance. So this being a very short bio, but in the interest of time, hopefully that will work. Brian, off to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. Peter and I are absolutely delighted. And we will keep this short and sweet and save time for questions at the end. So as a digital anthropologist, I study how technology impacts people in a variety of contexts, in this case, customer experience. And I look to reverse engineer those new standards for engagement to help inspire innovation in touch points, customer journeys, loyalty, service, you name it, and as a whole for the customer's experience, so that we can deliver the types of experiences that they want, that they didn't know they want, and now they can't live without, now that they've had it, and then constantly learning as we go along. And my joke, as Peter's heard before, is that nothing says innovation and experience like PowerPoint. So we'll get right to it. I call these times, since the dawn of the consumerization of the internet, Amazon.com in the mid-90s, the iPhone in 2006, specifically with the App Store. These were major milestones in digital Darwinism, where these big events happen that cause permanent shifts in customer behaviors, consumer expectations, business customer expectations, and the ways that we navigate life and work. Why this is so important is because naturally when we hear Darwinism, we think about the negative side of evolution, when in fact I'm a hopeless optimist, and I see the positive side of evolution. Now, knowing that people are going to change, knowing that expectations are going to change, how can we keep up with or get ahead of Darwinism so that we deliver the types of experiences that our customers and also our employees seek, talk about, rave about? The challenge with all of this is that historically, anything related to customer experience, specifically touch points, have had a history of being viewed as cost centers. And we tend to look at what are these investments and what kind of ROI can we expect from these investments, which when you dedicate the research and the time to looking at where are their problem points today so that we can improve a moment, a touch point, a transaction, just connecting information to someone, there is ROI. But there's also ROI where the I stands for ignorance, where there's an opportunity cost of what's the cost of not doing these things as well. What is happening over the last 20 years, and specifically in the last year, there has been an experience divide in between how we think about technology and implement technology, and more importantly, measure it, and also how customers, how people are embracing technology in their personal and professional lives. And that divide has been getting bigger and bigger. It's accelerated in the last year simply because the pandemic, the crisis, basically forced everyone to adopt or embrace digital in more aspects of their life than they did before the pandemic. What happens when someone starts to experience the conveniences, the personalization, the efficiency of excellent digital experiences, subconsciously and eventually consciously, that becomes the standard for engagement. So this experience divide becomes one of vulnerability and also one of opportunity. I often say that we compete with the best experiences in the game, whether or not you're B2B, B2B2C, B2C, whatever it is. When someone has an excellent experience, when they're on their device and they're intuitively interacting with whatever it is that they're doing, that is the standard. Anything that doesn't feel like that is suddenly not only outdated, but starts to feel obsolete. And at some point, customers, people feel it. They feel that it's not intuitive, that it isn't modern. And just as an example, it isn't just about what makes a good experience, it's the subconscious evolution that happens within each and every one of us as we become more and more digital. For example, one of the things that I used to study was how long was too long. Would you wait for a car until you opened the Lyft app? So, for example, if Uber said a car was 15 minutes away, you might open the Lyft app to see if a car was closer to you. And over time, this number eroded to the point where in New York, the last study I did was 5 to 6 minutes. If a car was further out than 5 to 6 minutes, you would open Lyft, or vice versa. And that is because we have become increasingly impatient. Digital has sort of made us, I jokingly refer to it as accidental narcissists, that we're reminded in everything that we do that we're the most important person in the world, that we can have anything that we want, when we want it, how we want it, to the point where Uber now advertises the average pickup time because they know that it's a competitive advantage. I also studied, for example, what happens when you experience buy online, pickup in store, or curbside, or click and collect. And over time, while it might have been the best thing ever that you'd experienced at the beginning, why hadn't I ever tried this? The same effect happens like we saw with Uber. You eventually expect to be in and out of there in 2 minutes, which is an unrealistic number, but it is the number that customers have said that they want. They want clear directions. They want dedicated parking. They want contactless and payment systems. They want intuitive digital experiences from the app to the parking lot and even in store. And they want dedicated counters and staff. They want dedicated lines, dedicated signage to the digital customer that is separate than the traditional physical store. Now, these are just examples. While you're not obviously offering buy online, pick up in store, these are just signs of how humanity changes as a result of digital. So when we talk about delivering exceptional experiences, you are catering to this kind of brain. This is a brain that has been rewired to move faster. If you've watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, that's part of the explanation. A lot of these digital technologies use what's called persuasive design. It's a form of user experience and user interface design to get you to change behaviors to their interests, right? But ultimately, what we have to study is how do we use it to deliver positive experiences? Regardless of what someone's doing online, it always falls into these buckets. They want relevant choices. They want immediacy. They want convenience, accuracy. They want everything to be experiential. And experience simply just means an emotional reaction to a moment. Do I feel good when I click this? Do I feel good when I land on this page? Do I feel good when I talk to a representative? They want things personalized. They want everything to be integrated and frictionless. They now want everything to be intuitive, as you saw with the buy online, pickup in store. And they want it to be platform native. And now we're starting to see that everybody just simply wants to be known throughout every interaction. If I talk, for example, in the B2C world, if I talk to marketing, if I talk to sales, if I talk to service, I want to be identified as a baton where it's passed, not having to start all over again. And in that experience divide, this is where we have seen so much innovation in D2C business models, but also in D2C experiences. Customer journeys have been reimagined to be the Uber of you name the industry. right? So this is why the mattress industry, the food industry, the music industry, the luggage industry, the eyeglass industry, everything is being reimagined for that digital first brain, those digital first expectations. And the luxury here is that these companies get to start from scratch, but all of the insights that they plug into are all of the insights that we could plug into. In fact, I've seen some of the greatest innovations in B2B transformation by looking at D2C companies and taking those insights. So like, how can we make that touch point better? How can we make that experience better? Because experiences we found in our global shopping index report, we also found it in our connected customer report that came out at the end of last year, that business customers and consumers have said equally that the experience you provide is as important as your products and services. And that has to do with that evolving accidental narcissism, that we're sort of catering to this sort of unsaid, unmet need that when they feel it, they just love it. So I put together a metaphor of what, what it means to be customer centric. There's a word that you've probably heard a million times, empathy. And empathy is, it's not just a buzzword. It just sort of makes us look at the journey at each touch point through the eyes of someone who's incredibly impatient or who wants somebody personalized, who's doing a million things at once, who has maybe, like my wife, 47 tabs open on a browser at any given time. And when we look at something new like AI, machine learning, chatbots, and innovation in a touch point, we see it as innovative because it's new to us. But when we look at it from the customer's perspective, it could look completely different, often unintuitive, not integrated, not platform native. And here's an example of that come to life. This was an example I used in my last book where the city of New York had a problem with parking signs where people just complained that they couldn't figure out whether or not they could park there. So they said, well, let's look at a design standard for innovation here so that more people can find them intuitive. And if you've ever had to park in New York, you know that trying to read a sign when everybody in the world is honking at you and threatening your life is going to be something that has to happen pretty quickly. So they came up with a design that, it still looks like a parking sign. It's cleaner. I don't know that they actually tested reading it while their lives were being threatened. But the thing about this is that it's an analog iteration, right? They used the parking sign as the box to think outside of and came up with a better parking sign. But if you look at the world through the eyes of a digital first brain, anything is possible. You could reimagine a parking sign for instant visualization like you might in an app. Same thing could be true for boarding passes on airplanes once we get back to those. Everything could be imagined for instantaneous engagement. And that's how, when we see the world through their eyes, we can come up with all kinds of possibilities. So in the few minutes I have left, I want to share with you what has changed specifically in the last year, so to make this a much more poignant and timely conversation to be having today. In the last year, I've taken a couple decades of previous research that was studied how digital changed customers so that we can innovate for them. You now add in a crisis. You also add in that everybody who wasn't already digital first had to become digital first in order to get food, to shop, to stay connected to people. And you have what I called Generation Novel, inspired by the novel coronavirus, which was it was a means to document customer behavior, not by age, not by demographics, but by common interests. So if we're all becoming accidental narcissists as a result of this, what does that mean? Well, it means that whether you're 25, 45, 55, whether it's B2B or B2C or B2B2C, whatever it is, we now all have the same expectations that if we're going to engage with you digitally, I want it to be more intuitive. I want it to be more personalized. This is research from our State of the Connected Customer report that shows that customers want new ways to get existing products and services digitally. They want you to expand customer engagement methods. And they also, where it's applicable, to see if digital inspires new types of products and services. But what they all want is for you to accelerate your digital initiatives. That's a pretty big deal because this is from business customers and also consumers. Bringing that word back, empathy here, you can see that none of us are going to ever look at an empty roll of toilet paper the same way again. Well, same with the bottle of sanitizer. We've just deeply changed. There's an emotional somatic marker that's forever attached to us that's going to bring these deep, visceral memories together. And so you add that to how someone makes decisions moving forward about the businesses that they want to align with. And what you see, this is from McKinsey, you see data that shows all around the world, customers are experimenting with new shopping behaviors. They're experimenting with new services and businesses, and most of them will stick with those new choices post-pandemic. They also expect you to understand their unique needs and expectations, and thankfully data and machine learning can help us with this. They expect consistent interactions across departments, and they expect brands to demonstrate empathy. And so if we're looking at the best brands in the business to inspire how we innovate in customer experience, then we need to look no further than delivering personalization, immediacy, convenience, making all of this stuff integrated. My colleague at Salesforce, his name is Henry King, and I have written a series on what we call relationship transformation. And this is really about looking at using an articulated state of how we want relationships to exist and how we want people to talk about those relationships, and using that to guide our digital investments. Using, I add an apostrophe S to customer experience so that we can personalize it. The customer's experience is what we're designing for. And essentially, this sets the stage for experience innovation. I think what D2C brands do the best is, and I tried to reverse engineer it into a sentence, which was they explore the lives of customers through their eyes, what they value, what they love, what they seek, and how they experience those products and the brand to discover new opportunities to deliver surprise and magic. And it's all measurable. And the companies that are doing this the best, even if it's step by step, are increasing engagement and ultimately enhancing journey. So there's no touch point that could probably go untouched. But the point is to start somewhere, to start in the places where maybe there's the greatest friction, maybe where there's not the greatest integration, and just use it as an opportunity to prioritize that engagement roadmap. I just have a few slides left here, and then we'll turn it over to Peter. Personalization, I call it the relevance revolution. It's really about asking different questions, since we have data across the board now, to use it in a way to develop the answers that guide what that customer experience strategy should look like, where we can make the most immediate gains, and where we can make longer term investments that improve the journey over time, because the goal is essentially to reimagine the customer journey as continuous, always on, and to meet the needs. The same person who's calling an Uber and can't wait more than 3 minutes is that same person who's going to connect with you. They don't draw the line between I'm a consumer in this application and I'm a business customer in this application. It's just now all blurred together. So I talk about maybe this time that we're spending together today as this customer's experience innovation manifesto, right? It's not really about B2B or B2B2C or B2C. It's about people to people now. It's about how human beings want to connect, simply because that's how they connect in every other aspect of their life. And 20 years of evolution and seeing 1 year just radically accelerate all of this change is actually going to become a competitive advantage. And this is, I think, the power and the importance of customer experience for you. And so I'll stop sharing here and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Peter.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much, Brian. And we also will be sharing presentations. So if you wanted to go a little bit deeper on some of those heavier slides, you're definitely going to have a copy of that.
Yes, I will also be sharing all of my material, and thank you, Brian. Are you folks seeing the Salesforce logo and
yes.
the comfort map? Great,
yeah.
Terrific. Well, to every yang there is a yin, and Brian does better than anyone else the yang of the positive energy that's waiting for you to unleash it and create this extraordinary opportunity of experience. To some extent, I get now to be the yin and talk about what I call the guardrails for transformation, the opportunities to be energetically doing the wrong thing, that it is well to anticipate in advance so that you can be sure that the positive energy does get directed in a couple of really important ways. One is to grasp the accelerating nature of this change, not merely to congratulate ourselves on being able to do continuous change, but to recognize that under acceleration, there are behaviors that we have to be continually modifying our modifications, as it were, and that designing an experience rather than congratulating ourselves on producing a technology artifact is absolutely key to this. And that among the ways to maintain the direction correctly is to be sure that we're always measuring our outcomes that we're achieving and not the activities that we merely hoped would get us there. And the goal of my organization in strategic research is, whenever possible, not to make predictions, but to reveal rather than to predict, to show what is and imply that the math makes certain outcomes almost inevitable. Brian has already shared some of our state of the connected customer data, and these are some of the ones that I share, which is that the notion of any going back to 2019 really must be killed without mercy. The investments that have been made and the expectations that have developed over this past year, internally as well as externally, because every CIO that I have had a chance to see over the last year has said the 2-year plan is now the 2-week prototype of the minimum viable product for the 2-month deployment. This acceleration is profound, and it is both the behavior of individuals and the behavior of organizations, but it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because this is McKinsey data. There are things that everyone did under pandemic necessity during the past year that they're happy to stop doing as soon as possible. For example, remote learning for their children. There is enormous appetite for getting the kids back in the classroom. But remote learning for the mid-career and late career professional, many people made their first experiments with this during the past year, discovered that they liked it, and that new demand is going to be much more persistent. Wendy Red over at the NatWest Group in the UK put this well when she said, my 50 to 70-year-old customers are now doing online banking and saying things like, why did it take a pandemic to get me to try this? This is so much easier than I thought it would be, and so much better. And that notion of going through one-way doors is an opportunity, but also a requirement. What you're about to see now is a slide that I added just now when I saw Brian's great slide about the posting of the average wait time for Ubers. There's been an idea that's been taught as if it were a rigorous science of supply and demand curves since George Marshall talked about it in 1890. But even at that time, he said, really, we can't actually guess how much of anything people will buy at prices very different from what they're accustomed to pay. So even as he was inventing the supply and demand curves that we've been drawing with sharp pencils ever since, he was admitting that it was essentially a qualitative and hand-waving kind of argument, except that now it's not, because the data we can obtain from organizations like Uber of at what point did people pay the surge price, or did they wait another 5 minutes to see if the price would fall? This is now actual crisp data on people's behavior. And the notion of consumer surplus, how much more would people willingly have paid for something than what was being charged? That now stops being such a hand-wavy idea and becomes something that can actually be measured, but we have to begin to measure it. We have to begin to measure something that was never measured before, not merely improve our ability to measure that which we've always known. This also affects, and as Brian has made clear, the B2B as well as the B2C buyer. Our data shows that business buyers want personalized engagement. They use phrases like, I want an Amazon-like experience. We have customers who make industrial equipment who've commented on the disparity between the relationship that they used to provide and the one that they get from Amazon. One of them said, I can't leave Amazon with a pair of new shoes without being offered the spare laces. And they said, when we sell a building chiller, if you really want to be sure you've got all the things you need to get it hooked up and running and actually chilling the building, you have to go to 9 different websites that all belong to us, but all look different. And they said, we have to do better than that. We have to bring, even in a B2B environment of building industrial equipment, people now expect us to own the problem and be sure they've solved it, not merely offer them an endless menu of bits and pieces, like going to IKEA and having to buy the parts in different boxes instead of having them all come in one box with one set of instructions. This combination of acceleration and transformation is at war with the way many companies have built a very disciplined process of acquiring new technology, which is basically a project approach, rigorous, time-consuming requirements definition, a deployment stage, and then a sigh of relief and an assimilation of the new capability. There is now a much more general recognition that that S-curve has to be replotted on different axes to make room for continuous change as the new state, that it is not merely an elevated state, but a state where you're doing better and able to change continuously. But even this is understating the problem, because exponential change is that different from constant change. And if you look at any number of parameters in your environment, number of people taking an Uber, number of people using an Airbnb, amount of memory in your phone, exponential curves are the norm, not the exception. But if you're down there at that point of divergence of the curves, there's going to be a little bit of tension in the room. The people who made the investment to get you up to that higher level on the blue curve are going to be saying, where's my ROI? The people who are being more vigorous about continual change are going to be saying, no, we're on this green curve. And if you're the one in the room who appreciates the reality of that red curve and its relentless acceleration, you'd better be armed to deliver that as a revelation and not a prediction, so that you can get the commitment and the buy-in that it's going to be required to make that happen. There are some curves we can actually look at. The amount of connectivity capacity on the planet. The first iPhone in 2007 wasn't even a 3G device, and many people are startled when that's pointed out. The growth in sheer connective capacity on the planet since then has been about a factor of 1,100. And you don't just do the same things 1,100 times more quickly. Now you can measure behavior, as I was discussing earlier in the case of figuring out people's sensitivity to Uber surge pricing, measure behavior and infer future behavior from indications of desire rather than conventional market research, which asks people, what would you like? As Peter Sondergaard, when he was still at Gartner, said, now we can measure what they seem to be trying to do or trying to get and bring them things that they didn't realize they could ask us to do. No one is going to write an RFP for your anti-gravity solution. They don't know they can have that. And so sometimes you need to go through the question being asked to understand the need that it implies and address that need before it becomes an actual request. What this implies is that we're going to be on another exponential curve, which is creating and collecting and examining enormous volumes of data, stupefyingly huge quantities of data. And it is not that this is a prediction I'm making. When Splunk went out and talked to business leaders, they said, as a candid admission, we know that about half of our data is dark. It's transactional record, it's history, it's summarized, it's reported, but it never guides future action. And they know the volume of that data is growing, and they believe there's a business risk in failing to stay abreast of the opportunity and the expectation that's implied by people who assume that you should have known that, assume that you should have been able to anticipate their requirement. It's really why Salesforce of now is enormously different from the Salesforce of only 4 years ago, because we spent a decade getting people to move away from thinking of CRM as a system of record and to make it something where they log in on Monday to improve sales performance instead of logging in on Friday to record their sales activity. But now, in just the last 3 or 4 years, we've brought in the ability to connect to any data source you can legitimately access can now be informing your decisions. AI-based tools can be pulling those splinters and fragments of data together into a unified picture. Visual exploration tools can be allowing you to analyze that data and look for insights to guide future action. And industry perspectives from the former partner, now part of Salesforce Velocity team, can channel those recommendations in ways that are quite specifically focused on the needs and the environments of individual industries. This is important because the pandemic entry all took place in kind of a universal shared way early last year, but the exit, the end game is quite different, industry to industry, region to region. If you're down at the bottom of this McKinsey list in healthcare or IT, you had a vigorous pandemic out of which you are roaring into an accelerating 2021 and 2022. If you're up there at the top end of that list in higher education or in travel and hospitality, you're looking at an arduous and much more transformative challenge of figuring out what your need is that's being met and not merely trying to return to your previous levels of activity. And so different industries need to be having different conversations. The reason I'm using this word conversation with particular emphasis is that in 1950, Alan Turing originally said, intelligence is the ability to carry on a meaningful conversation. And that if a machine can carry on a conversation and you can't tell the difference between a machine and a human being, any arguments over intelligence are pretty much gone. Well, what's the Turing test for an organization? Can it appear to be recognizing its customer's context, understanding from the context what any given question implies about desire and concern, and crucially, recommending a next useful action? If that can be done consistently well, there's intelligence. If it cannot, then there's robotic scripted selling behavior. And no one is flattered or complimented by that, no matter how well it's done. Intelligent conversation, it turns out, is much more dependent not on your ability to reason or do induction or prediction or deduction. They used to think those would be the hard parts of AI. It turns out the hard part of AI is knowledge. And when people have attempted to apply AI tools to problem-solving environments, like keeping the Air Force's planes flying for decades longer than it was ever expected, they've discovered that their decades of data simply wasn't organized and curated in a way that made it consumable in machine learning applications. And so the Air Force, for example, worked with Delta Airlines, great Salesforce customer, to manage their data into a form that could feed the beast. You might think that the Air Force is a remarkably exotic and sophisticated environment, except that our research with Deloitte has shown that the typical brand needs to look in literally dozens of places, more than 3 dozen places, to assemble that complete picture of its relationship with a particular customer or other stakeholder, which is what led Forrester to say that the typical company should be thinking about constructing an AI-worthy data environment immediately, even if it doesn't believe that AI application is going to happen for another few years. The need to get the data into a form that can feed the AI is an urgent necessity, no matter how leisurely your timetable for applying AI to that data might be. This is why I'm so excited about what we were able to show in the Sales Cloud relaunch just a few weeks ago, where one of the most difficult but rich forms of data, which is conversation among people, is now something that can be instrumented and taken apart and analyzed for its key points of meaning, where now a recording of a meeting that perhaps no one will go back and listen to the 45 minutes or 30 minutes of discussion, but now algorithms can identify the key points in that conversation where certain words were spoken that are suggestive of a fork in the road where things went the wrong way, or a coaching opportunity for someone who could be shown how to make sure the conversation went in a different direction the next time that situation arises. I was quite startled when we were able to demonstrate this as a generally available feature. If we had shown this and said, we are working on it, you'll see it in the next year or two, I would have thought that's a pretty big elephant to barbecue. And yet here it is, it's a future that's now. Among the remarkable things is that this idea that conversation is the channel through which people want to engage, it's not really a new idea. Do you realize that the average app downloaded to a smartphone is used 1.1 times? It's brought down to meet the transactional need, but never really becomes part of their lives. And you heard this from Brian earlier. What do you have to do to become part of the life of your customer and not just a substitutable option for a class of transaction? Well, 4 or 5 years ago now, we were with Facebook saying, instead of a bag of hammers, which is what all those apps on your phone can be, what if there's one conversational channel in which the things you want recognize that you need them and come to you in a proactive kind of way? And of course, now we're talking about working much more closely with Slack to make conversational interaction, that canonical Turing test from 1950, the measure of the intelligence with which an organization is meeting our needs. Because no matter how well you do that thing on the left of making your silos bigger, faster, and stronger, you don't get the thing on the right, which is people feeling that it really is about everything coming to them. Among our challenges in this can be the fact that our own organizations have a siloed character. There's an expression called Conway's Law that when companies build solutions, they mirror their own organization chart in what they produce. I've taken the names of companies off of these charts here. They're at a satirical website, bonkersworld.net, organizational-charts. Go ahead and take the pop quiz, see if you can guess who's the company whose org chart is bubbles pointing guns at each other, or the one whose org chart is a legal department that dwarfs the engineering department. Go ahead and take the quiz and see if you guessed correctly. But don't let any of these be you. I'm pleased to say none of them is us. Among the challenges is that the easiest things to measure may not be the best indicators. When Harvard Business Review looked at companies that had not been successful in adopting CRM, it turned out that people at the top of the org chart loved what they were getting, much more information, much more guidance and ability to manage people. But at the bottom of the org chart, the sales team was saying, this is just a data entry task for me. They're measuring the time I spend logged in, but most of that is spent copying and pasting data from other systems into this system. The measure of login time was being conflated with the goal of adoption and was being assumed to imply the creation of value. But in fact, all that was being done was the spending of time that people thought of as taking them away from creating value. And what they wound up doing is getting all their real work done in spreadsheets and just recording the results in the CRM system. It is dangerously easy for the things that are easy to measure to lead you astray in this kind of way. And this is the subject of another named law, Goodhart's law, that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. If I reward you for how many nails you've made, to use Adam Smith's old measure of productivity, well, you'll make me a ton of little wire brads. If I reward you for the pounds of nails, you'll make me a handful of railroad spikes. Neither of those is the kind of thing I need to build a house. This is why it is so important to me measuring the outcome being achieved and not the activity being undertaken. Among the challenges is that we congratulate ourselves on thinking outside our box. But that's not enough. You have to be thinking outside everybody's boxes. You have to be working with ecosystem partners to build systems of systems, because otherwise your modernization and your integration is just a little bubble of artisanal oil in a world of dirty water. If you take the edges of your box and say they aren't the boundaries on what we do, every one of them is an interface with our customer, either before, during, or after they do what they do with us. What is our opportunity to enrich that complete experience and not just the activity or the artifact that we think of as our product? Because the people who build those ecosystems wind up owning the experience, therefore the loyalty, therefore the profitability opportunity for their interaction with the customer. My friend Tom Davenport at Babson College has worked with Andrew Spanier to write in Sloan Management Review about the increasing sensitivity of customers. And Brian has talked about this earlier. This is not a cost reduction opportunity. Customers can smell cost reduction a long way away. They can tell when what you're congratulating yourself on having provided in a new self-service interface. The customer can tell when you've just been throwing work over the wall and making it their job to get that done. Only 1/5 of customers see trillions of dollars of digital transformation as having improved their experience. But Jeannie Ross, who recently retired from her position at MIT Center for Information Systems Research, wrote a wonderful book called Designed for Digital, in which she makes an argument kind of analogous to what I've said earlier, which is that digital transformation is not the accomplishment of buying and putting on the running shoes. It's the running of the race once you've got the shoes properly fitted and tied. The technology adoption is the shoes. The marathon race begins once the shoes are on, and saying, how do I go beyond automating and accelerating and digitizing what I do now to create a new value proposition enabled by and wrapped around that is a digital value proposition. This is going to be the key to success going forward. The analogy I've often made is that if I give you a chainsaw and never explain the part about turning it on, never even talk about why that heavy motor is in there, you may regard it as merely a clumsier way of doing what you used to do. And adoption of technology sometimes fails for this reason. But if the power switch can be explained and the reason for the motor can be there and the potential of the power tool can be communicated, then we can do things we would never try to do before. And that is where we want to take our customers and help them take their customers, is to discover and unleash that kind of power. John Templeton, who before Warren Buffett was the world's superstar inventor, famously said to people who try to tell him that their idea was going to work because this time it's different, he would say, those are the four most expensive words in the English language. Well, that came up in May when David Rubenstein at Carlyle Group said, among the biggest challenges of the post-pandemic period is to recognize this time it is different for reasons that Brian has described and that I hope I've been able to channel a little bit more specifically into the opportunities that are there, the expectations the customer has, and the things that you can be using as yellow lights or even red lights to make sure that when you do it, you're doing the right thing and not having vigorous energy that doesn't really move where people want to go. So thank you for the chance to collaborate with Brian and share some of these ideas with you. And we have time now for discussion as you wish.
Yeah, if we're able to jump right in, I have a number of questions, but I'll ask the one that I think both Brian and Peter touched on. We talked about this idea of continuous change, and that's challenging from multiple aspects. But what are some of the characteristics of organizations that have been able to adopt not only driving continuous change, but enabling the recipients of that change to be able to kind of absorb all that and run the marathon, to continue with Peter's analogy?
Well, there are at least two parts of that question. There was a really good piece that I think was Harvard Business Review sometime in the past year, looking at the organization chart of Apple before and after Steve Jobs' return to that company. Before, it was organized by a product line and a very Conway's Law kind of thing. There was the iMac team, and there was the MacBook team, and there was the iPhone team. And Steve reorganized things so that there was the imaging team, and their expertise in forming and using images was then made available to the various product lines. And they owned responsibility for that outcome being delivered as well as it could be through all the other channels, instead of having redundant and probably less effective splintering of that expertise across the product lines. Because ultimately the customer wants a picture and wants the ability to share those images with people. And Apple literally reorganized itself. And it's a very Conway's Law kind of conversation. They changed the way that ownership of outcome was distributed and compartmented to align with capability rather than with activity. And I think that's a really powerful example, because everyone knew that organization implied responsibility as well as opportunity for them. Brian, you probably have some different angles that you'd like to add on that.
Oh, you're
on mute. You're on mute.
Oh man. You think by now I would figure that out. I really appreciate, Peter, that example that you shared. One of the things that Steve actually said when he came back to Apple, he was asked by someone who was both, well, just quite skeptical about his return, and he asked what he was going to do differently to basically, save Apple. And he said that he was going to start with the customer's experience and work backward to the technology. And I think that's where I think I've seen some of the greatest failures in organizations and some of the greatest successes in becoming agile and becoming transformative, is that they don't have a vision or a supporting culture or structure to move in these much more agile and dynamic fashions. And so that really gets down to the culture of the organization, that gets down to leadership. And that also gets down to, do you feel, Ben, and do your colleagues feel empowered to go do these things differently and to move in directions that are not grounded by yesterday's rules, and even incentivized to explore and experiment? Because that's really where I think we're going to start seeing a lot of this elasticity take place, is in the ability to literally act like a startup within a bigger organization, because I don't think we're not going to see great success in trying to apply yesterday's models to tomorrow's.
Brian
needs.
just used a key word, which I'm not sure if I used or if he used earlier, which is the word experiment. We had a conversation at our Dreamforce conference a few years ago where someone said in Silicon Valley, they talk about running fast and breaking things and learning to fail faster. As soon as you leave Silicon Valley, no one really wants to talk about failing faster. It's just not a popular idea. But Thomas Edison said something very powerful years ago, which has been quoted with many different numbers in the sentence. The one that I believe is closest to truth is when he said, we haven't failed 700 times. We've found 700 things that don't work. And none of our competitors knows about those things that don't work. And the comment at Dreamforce was, it's not that you're learning to fail. It's that you're learning to embrace the opportunity to conduct fast, cheap, informative experiments that don't take you down, multi-year money pits of ultimately delivering a perfect version of the wrong thing, but rapidly allow you from a minimum viable product to iterate quickly. And as Brian has said a number of times, be agile in your response. Drew Houston at Dropbox has talked about this. Many people don't realize Dropbox was not his first idea. It was the third idea after two other ideas had shown him, oh, wait, what people really need is this. And being prepared to tear off the page of the pad, crumple it up and throw it away is not an admission of failure. It's a step of learning, which is really important.
Yeah, well said, Peter. Turn it back to you, Ben and team.
Well, I'll ask if anybody else has any questions or comments.
Peter, this is Russ Haylers. Where we've seen companies apply this fail fast methodology, I guess you'd say.
Learning from experiment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But where we've seen them apply this appropriately and change the culture. Because, as we've went down our path for innovation, I would say that's one of the areas that we still need to embrace much more.
It's a great question. We have a customer, New England Biolabs. They make products that you probably don't buy. They make things that are like protease restriction enzymes that are used for chopping up DNA molecules. It's a pretty advanced area. They came to our Dreamforce conference years ago and saw a Coca-Cola freestyle machine demonstrated on stage. I don't know if you've ever run into one of these. It allows you to make your own custom mix of the different flavoring essences of the Coca-Cola branded soft drinks, come up with your own blend, and if you like it, name it, put a QR code on it, share it with your friends, then they can walk up to any freestyle machine anywhere and try the thing that you mixed for them, which is a really cool idea for turning Coca-Cola into a social brand and not just a consumer packaged goods brand. The New England Biolabs people looked at that and thought about that. And they went home and they Velcroed an iPad to the front door of the refrigerator that held their enzymes. And when people took stuff out of the refrigerator now, just by scanning the barcode, now they had moment by moment knowledge of what people were using instead of just having the gross and clumsy knowledge of, okay, they're out of stock on that chemical. Now they had visibility about the combinations in which chemicals were being used, and they could both support and even price preferentially to support research protocols and not just sales of bulk chemical. And it took them into a role of being a participant in the research program and not just a supplier of chemicals that anyone else could sell. And in 6 weeks, that was no longer an iPad Velcroed to the door. That was a new generation refrigerator with these capabilities built in. The fact they were able to prototype that and deliver it on a cloud platform is why they were able to do that in such an amazing way. But the fact that they were able to take inspiration from a soft drink machine to sell an advanced biochemical laboratory supply is among the other reasons that I think that's an amazing story.
Interesting. Thank you.
Ben, you're on mute.
Yeah, Brian Miller. I saw you come off mute before. I think we have time if you still had a question or comment.
I'm fascinated with this idea of experimenting to milestones and outcomes. And we were on this event that Ben organized, I think it was 2 years ago, and we heard a lot about a fairly organized kind of function of I have an idea. You have 30 days to get to milestone X, 60 days to get to milestone Y, 90 days to get to milestone Z. What happens when you get to day 30 and you're this close, but you're emotionally attached to the experiment that, I just need 20 more days. I just need another 50 grand. I can figure this out, that sort of thing. What kind of tips for organizations as complex as ours would you have to kind of really anchor to that kind of discipline? I know for my own self, that's something that I have a hard time putting the faith aside and saying, you know what, we said it would be by day 90, it's day 90, we haven't got there, it's back on the shelf time. How do you take the passion out of it?
Being prepared to say, okay, we've learned what doesn't work, and we're going to apply that knowledge to an insight about what does work. I don't know if you've ever heard the name of John Harrison. He's famous for being the first guy to build a clock accurate enough to be used at sea to estimate longitude well enough to be valuable. He started by taking the most accurate clocks in the world and tried to make them tolerant of being moved around on a moving boat. And he added corrective mechanism and then corrections for the corrections and corrections for the corrections to the corrections. Wound up with a clock with thousands of parts that worked well enough to win the prize, but he seemed to have hit a wall. 26 years into that process, he had the guts to start completely over again, not with an accurate clock and make it tolerant of motion, but with a pocket watch that was tolerant of motion and try to make it more accurate. And he wound up producing something that was far more accurate, more compact, and more robust than what he had spent 26 years perfecting. The difference between his story and ours is that now we have to achieve that level of willingness to start all over again on a much more compressed time scale than 26 years. But it is possible, and when it happens, extraordinary results can result.
I'm sorry, Peter, for a minute there, I was actually in your audience appreciating your story. That's great. Brian, one thing I would add to that, well, actually just it's completely different, is Google really likes to talk about OKRs as a measurement system. As they work towards whatever that project is or whatever that innovation outcome is. And one of the things that I had seen in some of our work together were these micro steps along the way as well. So even if you didn't hit that big milestone, you were still able to achieve some of the other things that made everybody feel like the morale was on target. And that morale would allow for further experimentation, because that's really what it's about. It's just continuous experimentation. There's no end to this journey, especially now, as Peter said earlier, we're not going back to normal.
Yeah.
And digital's only going to continue to accelerate. So that having some type of steering committee or something that allows for that cross-functional decision-making and experimentation has to be established now, where we're constantly saying, this is where we're at, this is where we're going, this is what we've learned, this is what we still have to learn, and that's good.
There's one Jedi mind trick that can be very effective in keeping you from doing what you're talking about, which is saying, wow, we're almost there, we're almost there, we're almost there. It's the bumblebee tuna law of project naming, which I stole from their chief marketing officer when he said, at Bumblebee Tuna, we have a simple rule. No project can be named for the technology it deploys, only for the business outcome that it achieves. You cannot have a project called ERP upgrade. That's not a business outcome. That's a step along the way. That's an enabler for what you actually wanted to do, which is supply chain visibility or customer information improvement. That's an outcome. That's a goal. If you could do it with a magic 8-ball or with a sprinkle of pixie dust, you would do that. And it keeps you away from congratulating yourself on and becoming obsessed with the perfection of the technology path that you're on. And it constantly serves as a reminder, wait a minute, the reason we're doing it is this. The reason we're doing it is this. And if you want a really great example of that, I don't know if you saw the movie Steve Jobs, in which Michael Fassbender plays the title role, which is not a documentary. It's just 3 incidents, highly dramatized. But at the end of the movie, he says to his daughter, I'm going to put your favorite 100 songs in your pocket. No, your favorite 1,000 songs in your pocket. The songs in the pocket, not the piece of technology, And when Apple first introduced the iPod, it was greeted by the marketplace as an underfeatured, overpriced, unimpressive MP3 player in a world that had lots of MP3 players. Sony alone had 3 different divisions competing against each other to make MP3 players. But 3 years after the iPod was introduced, because it did something really critical, it came with the content provided in the form of the iTunes service as well, which no one else had even tried to do. 3 years later, there's a new word in the Oxford English Dictionary, podcast. No one called them podcasts before there were iPods. People have been downloading stuff from the internet for a long time. Steve Jobs literally changed the language of using network-based resources by owning the experience. I want to give you your favorite songs in your pocket, not I want to produce a cool piece of hardware. And that is an achievable goal. And now we have the data to do it because there aren't enough Steve Jobses in the world. But we got the kind of data streams available, as you know, Brian and I have both been sharing. Those data streams can contribute tremendous opportunity for insight if we treat them as food for insight and not just transactional records to be summarized, reported, and never seen again.
So the inverse of that, and that's very helpful. Thank you. The inverse of knowing when to quit and when to acknowledge that you've learned something and it's going to hydrate kind of your next pursuit. The inverse of that is sometimes we do hit, and the challenge, I think, in a different measure is when to put something out, let the balloon go and stop kind of trying to.
Oh, yeah.
You're wedded to this thing that has worked and worked well, to kind of hand it off. And
well, this is why minimum viable product is such a powerful idea. As soon as you've got something that does something useful, even if it doesn't do everything you imagined it would do, now you can put it into the hands of customers, and it can be amazing the insights that they'll bring you on. That thing you were wedded to doing, turns out they didn't actually want that particularly very much. And so waiting until you could do that would have been a mistake. And sometimes they'll have an extraordinarily creative idea for how you could do it, or someone will turn out that someone else's API already does that. And you can partner to create that solution. And all of those are much better outcomes than just banging your head against the wall in the lab for another year to do what maybe the customer didn't actually want, or maybe what someone else was perfectly prepared to API to you.
thank you.
Yeah, I know that we have one more question, but I think we are hitting our timeline, and I would like to.
Kristen did have her. If we could just do one more question.
Okay. If it's a quick one, then go ahead.
Well, no pressure. I hope it's a good one. When we talk about innovation internally, or at least in the practice group that I work with, it tends to fall, in 3 categories. You get people who just get it and they think about our business in very broad terms in terms of how we need to be in the market and thinking about our clients' problems differently. You have those that look at it and think innovation is process improvement. So let's create a bot that does something we already do faster. And then you have people who will look at it and say, well, we don't sell a product. We sell knowledge, we sell experience, we sell intelligence. That's how we help our clients. So this concept of, innovating our product is really not for us. And so, certainly I see a ton of applicability in everything that you covered today, but what are your best practices, if you will, in working with professional services firms or firms that, are not like the Apple or Uber, where there is a defined product at the end?
Brian, you want to take the first one on that? I've got a few things I'd like to add, but go ahead. Why don't you go first?
I'll set it up for you, Peter. I'll hit a more basic approach. I love this question, and because it's for a very personal reason. No innovation can happen until there's innovation in your own mindset, right? Which is how you see the world differently than you saw it yesterday. And that's a really big leap to make. And before we get to the best practices, I want everybody to appreciate the fact that everything that we've learned in life has been the opposite of innovation. It's been how well we follow the rules and how well we operate within the confines that are set up in terms of our norms, right? In school, at home, in work. And innovation asks you to basically challenge all of those conventions. It's really hard to think out in that direction because of just who we are as human beings. So mindset, processes, thinking, communication, all of those are ripe for innovation too, not just products and services and not just how we deploy them. And right before I turn it over to Peter, there's one little exercise I go through in every step, which is this iteration or is this innovation? Which is, are we doing something new that makes what we did yesterday better, faster, more efficient at scale? Like, for example, automating through chatbots, existing services. Or are we solving a problem in a completely new way or introducing something that delivers new value? Because that's going to be innovation. And there's nothing wrong with having one or the other. It's just understanding where you are in those things, because technically all organizations are going to have to track through iteration, because you can improve things, and innovation, because there is always new value to be created. Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Our CEO and co-founder, Mark Benioff, has been known to quote Picasso and the Dalai Lama with phrases like the eye of the child and the beginner's mind. My favorite is Peter Drucker calling incongruity the first of the 7 sources of innovation opportunity. Being able to look at something and say, this makes no sense. Why do we put up with this? Why are we tolerating this and making incremental improvement on this when this is a fundamentally stupid thing? Because then you ask, well, why do we do it that way in the first place? This is also an expression known as Chesterton's fence. There must have been a reason that that fence got built. And before you rip it down, you should find out what it was. But if it turns out that that fence is no longer needed because of new knowledge, then you can proceed to say, let's rip off the scabs and get angry all over again at this thing that we've learned to tolerate, because now we can do something about it. The problem is the well-adjusted human being doesn't get up in the morning and get mad all over again at things that they were supposed to have been mature enough to learn to get along with that. And so in some ways, the job of the innovator is to get people angry all over again at things that they were comfortable with having learned to tolerate. And doing that is a disruptive act. It's not going to be a popular act in some organizations. The culture that is open to that idea is going to have to be a bumblebee tuna culture that says the outcome is the point, not the activity. My colleague Dan DeBow once said, if you fall in love with your solution to a problem, you're at risk of being taken down by the next person with a better idea. But if you fall in love with the problem, everyone who comes up with a better idea is your potential partner instead of your potential enemy. And that's a really powerful idea. Innovation is not a natural behavior. If you go to the caves outside Beijing, you can find the fossil record of 10,000 generations, 200,000 years of tool-making hominids whose hand axes went from 5.5 to 4.5 centimeters in length. They didn't even come up with the screwdriver, let alone the laser. And so don't think, to Brian's point, incremental improvement is what organizations do best. Saying, wait a minute, maybe we should be solving this problem in a fundamentally different way. That's not natural behavior. And inculcating that readiness to do that largely has to come from the top. Encouraging people to gore the sacred cows is definitely a leadership behavior as opposed to a management behavior. Perfect.
All right. Peter, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a fantastic presentation on some of those things. So thank you so much.
It was tremendous fun. Thank you all. Brian, good to see you.
Good to see you, Peter.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
All right, perfect. All right, thank you.